Welcome to MBA 543, St. Francis University. This is Chapter 2 for the MBA course 543. Again, my name is Adam Conrad, the instructor for the course, and we're going to be talking about evolution of selling models in Chapter 2. So a couple of the learning objectives for Chapter 2 involve discussing the evolution of personal selling models as an extension of the marketing concept. Describing the evolution of consultative selling from the marketing era to the present, defining strategic selling and name the four broad strategic areas in the strategic consultative selling model, and describing the evolution of the partnering and the nature of strategic account management, and explaining how value-added selling strategies enhance personal selling. Okay, so the marketing concept. So a little bit about the concept. Essentially what we have here is big changes in personal selling models from, peddling, which, kind of door-to-door salespeople, which you've heard, probably seen in movies, television programs, to long-term consultative problem solving and value-added partnering. So really these things combined actually is, kind of was prompted by the emergence of the marketing concept. So marketing concept is a principle that holds that achieving organizational goals depends on knowing the needs and wants of target markets and delivering the desired products. Customer satisfaction is really the pinnacle of this. Customers drive the markets. It's not, we're not in the era of the 1950s in the United States where we could actually just make a product and people would just flock to purchase it. We really need to focus on what the needs and wants of each customer and help maintain their satisfaction. So again, the age of marketing, the age of information began in the 50s. Get a little table here for that, where we essentially have organizations that, the needs and wants of target markets adapted themselves. Product orientation is replaced by a customer orientation. So essentially in the 50s, well, you think way back. Let's go way back to the common phrase you hear about the Henry Ford and the Model T was that you could have any color that you wanted so long as it was black. So at the time, the demand was so strong that it didn't matter that he could essentially say, we're going to build them this way because there's such a strong demand in the market for a low-priced automobile that they could, get some real economies of scale out of the mass production and make them one color. To some degree, you see that here in 2019 with a company like Tesla. Tesla has drastically reduced the options in the ordering of their cars. They have such strong demand, for example, with a Model 3, that they've said, we're only going to build this particular type of car right now, and we've got plenty of people lined up to purchase it. So to some degree, while we are seriously focused in this millennium with customer satisfaction, there's still little examples where you as a manufacturer, as a company, can actually still behave sort of like it's 1950 or 1920, where you can actually just make the product and then people will flock to it. Of course, that'll change as more electric vehicles hit the market, but I think that's just kind of a current example. You don't have to have a broad array of choices when there's such a demand. So the consultative selling era emerged in the 60s and 70s, where you have salespeople become diagnosticians, or essentially there's a whole body of work out there. You can read books on diagnostic selling, where you essentially take a look to get the customer needs. A good example of that in sales training, we often talk about diagnostic selling, where you actually go in and say, start asking lots of questions to try to figure out exactly what's going on with the customer, what their needs are, and help identify those things. A good story we tell oftentimes in selling is this little story. So, if you go to the doctor's office and you walk into the doctor's office and you sit down, the doctor comes into the room and says, good morning, how you doing? And then gets out his prescription pad and writes you out a prescription for some antibiotics and hands it to you, and then gets up to leave the room. You would, at that point, feel, certainly you would feel strange that the doctor just merely, having looked at maybe the vital signs that the nurse took or whatever, or maybe looked at your history, said, we're just going to give you a prescription for antibiotics. you would look at that and say, well, that's strange. Why would you do that? You didn't even review me. You didn't diagnose me and tell me what was wrong with me. You just wrote out a prescription. So as the patient, you say, well, why'd you write me a prescription for penicillin or for antibiotics? And the doctor says, well, lots of people coming in here and with the flu, and we just give them some antibiotics because we feel like there's nothing we can really do to treat the flu, but we use antibiotics for secondary infections. And of course, your reply would be, well, you haven't even looked at me. You don't even know that I have the flu. You don't even know that's why I came in today. And so in large part, that's kind of how selling changed. Selling went from, we're going to build a product and everybody's going to flock to it, to let's take a look and diagnose the customer needs and wants to say, what specifically would you like? Think about it today where you've moved away from a mass market to a very detailed market. We'll use Tesla as another example, or other things you can purchase online. But Tesla is a good example. You can go online and order your car online. You can configure it. You do this with many car manufacturers. So the manufacturers get a pretty good sense looking at the shopping carts and the orders of customers to figure out, well, gee, this many people are purchasing this type of vehicle. Maybe we ought to make more of that, or maybe we ought to make more options regarding that. That certainly has become the case with automobiles in the United States, where many manufacturers aren't even not making cars. They're not making sedans. They're only making SUVs and crossovers. So lots of changes in sales and sales emphasis. There's, back in the 50s, the selling emphasis was that organizations recognized that salespersons in a position to collect product, market, and service information, but really didn't do a lot of that at that time. But once we move into the 60s and 70s, the buyer needs are identified through two-way communication. Getting information and giving and negotiation tactics are replacing manipulating the buyers in that era. So we move on to the 80s, the early 80s. We have an evolution of a more complex selling environment and a greater emphasis on market niches, creating the need for greater structure and more emphasis on planning. So in the 80s, we have strategies given as much attention as selling tactics. Product position is given more attention, and more emphasis on account management and team selling. So now we're starting to see where customers have choices, they have needs, they'll go to other companies. We're not the only game in town that can say, look, we're going to build this one model and you're going to buy it. So a bit of a change in the early 80s. And so now we have to the 90s and the present, where we have what we call the partnering era. So moving from a strategic selling era to more of a partnering era, where we have salespeople who are encouraged to think of everything they say to do in the context of a long-term, high-quality partnership with individual customers. And so the Salesforce automation provides more specific customer information. So I talked earlier in chapter 1 about CRM systems, customer relationship management systems. So we should really know just about everything we can know about a client going into a sales call. I can tell you on a personal level, being a business owner, I often have salespeople call me up and want to sell me something over the phone. I'll use advertising as a perfect example. They'll call me up and they want to sell me advertising. And they get me on the phone and they proceed to pitch me on some advertising package that they have. And I will often stop them and say, no, wait a second. What do you know about my company? And shockingly, the answer is almost the same. They know nothing about my company. They could be a local company selling local advertising, and they may know a little bit about our company, but they don't. So let me ask you a question. What are types of advertising that my company does currently? And they honestly won't know. And to me, that's an extreme miscalculation on their part, lack of preparation. Today, we expect consumers, business owners expect salespeople to know more than that. And there's really no excuse for not knowing more. It's simple to Google a company or an individual and find out pretty much everything that they're doing. It only takes a couple of minutes of preparation. So my point of view is, as a business owner, if you haven't stopped to do that minimal amount of preparation, then what value are you bringing to the table? You don't even know what we're doing or how you can help us. Oh, you are looking at this and saying, I have this to sell, you need to buy it. And that's very much an old school, 60s and 70s approach to marketing and sales, which does not work in today's environment. So again, just back to the table, the customer supplants the product as the driving force in sales. There's greater emphasis on strategies that create customer value. and adaptive selling is given greater emphasis. So that adaptive selling is that piece I'm talking about, where sales rep locally for advertising sales doesn't take a couple of minutes to just determine who I am, what we're doing. I've had people from other radio stations call me and say, "Would like to sell you some radio." I said, "Do you know what other radio I'm doing?" "No, I have no idea what else you're doing." And to me, that's simply inexcusable. So the marketing mix that's driving all of this. So we have, and I'm sure by now in your college career, you've learned product, place, price, and promotion. You've certainly probably also learned there's variants of this, that instead of there being the 4 Ps, that you hear the 4 Ps, that there are other folks will add many other versions of this. I think that the piece that you need to look at from a promotion standpoint is really the piece that fits in with personal selling, and that part really want to focus on the elements kind of drive down how promotion can be further subdivided into advertising, public relations, sales promotion, and personal selling. So there's no question, oops, and I need to go to the next slide so you get the 4 Ps there. So again, promotion, driven down into, further subdivided into advertising, public relations, sales promotion, and personal selling. And so, it's really a key concept here that, we're talking about personal selling and how this impacts the business. Personal selling is often the most major promotional method used in the promotion mix of companies. Firms make big investments in personal selling based on what they see as trends. Products and services becoming increasingly more sophisticated and complex. Obviously I used the example in chapter 1 of selling an airliner. It's a very complex piece of equipment. It's a very complex sale. That's not going to sell itself. The competition is greatly increased in many areas. So you're not in a market by yourself. And the demand for quality, value, and service by customers has sharply risen. And one thing, we'll talk more about this, but it doesn't take much for a client to get upset and move away or walk away from your company or go to a competitor because of promises from a competitor to be able to do a better job. So personal selling, again, has essentially has evolved through 3 distinct developmental periods. Consultative selling as an era, strategic selling as an era, and partnering as an era. So we're going to talk a little bit about the evolution of consultative selling. So consultative selling emerged in the late 60s and 70s and is an extension of the marketing concept. So what we've had in consultation selling is the salesperson is playing the role of consultant. It's quite a bit different than transactional selling. Where transactional selling, the buyer's looking for the lowest price, and so. But in consultative selling, again, extension of the marketing concept, and it is where the salespeople are doing need identification. And they're not manipulating their clients, but rather negotiating with their clients. So what they'll go through is this need discovery, selection of a solution, need satisfaction and presentation, and servicing the sale. So think about this again in the context of a doctor's office visit. You discover, you diagnose, you select a solution. Look, I think this is the right medication for you. You present that to the patient, you explain to them the pros and cons of this particular medication, and then you follow up. And that's from a medical standpoint. I spent a good portion of my career in medical software sales, is an example. This would be the same or similar in many other industries. If you figured out, you went into a company and they've got a problem. We use the candy wrapping as an example. You go in, taught critical path, taught project management for years. And so project management's a good example of this. You go into a factory and you find out that they've got 2 lines making candy, and they go into 1 line wrapping the candy. And so the throughput of the lines that are coming into wrapping the candy are completely beholden to or completely bottlenecked or restricted by the output of the candy wrapper. So the reality is, you look at this from a business standpoint, they say, look, we'd like to double the output of the amount of candy we have. We'd like you to help us figure that out. and you flow through and you look and you see in the factory that the problem is everything goes through one wrapping machine, and if that machine goes down, none of the candy gets wrapped. Well, obviously you can't ship candy without it being wrapped. So what you do is you select a solution. You say, look, you need an additional candy wrapper. You need two, one on each line, or you need a higher output version so that you can actually let the lines run at full capacity. You basically make that presentation, explain to the staff why this makes sense. You talk about breakdown rates, you talk about servicing, how you're going to keep it running, and you make your presentation on why it's a smart maneuver to purchase a different type of machine to actually do the job. And then you follow up and service the sale. So a pretty straightforward process in the consultative, in terms of consultative selling. Let me get that. Okay, get the right, back up a second here. Slide-wise, got ahead of my slides. All right, so major features of consultative selling. The customer is seen as a person to be served. Their needs are identified through two-way communication. We talked about the need identification, problem solving, and negotiation, and the fact that you have to service at every phase of the personal selling process. So one of the things you learn, and particularly in very complex sales, is that you may not sell to just one area. You may have to get approvals through many different departments, department heads, ultimately always to the person that can sign the check. So it's very important to sign the purchase order. It's very important that you service at every level that you work within an organization. We'll talk about more of that. But developing contacts and communication at each level within an organization makes a big difference. The evolution of strategic selling involves strategic planning. So strategic planning is a process that matches the firm's resources to its market opportunities. So take software, for example. I worked in the era of software, whenever electronic clinical records was just coming into vogue in the software business. And so the company that wants to offer this needs a strategic plan and say, look, this is where this business is going in 3 years, 5 years. If we don't have a robust electronic clinical documentation system to manage patient charts, we're going to not be able to sell software anymore. I mean, the market will move against us. And so this is where, as a firm, you basically look at the market opportunity that's out there. You say, look, we see an opportunity, we see this as a burgeoning opportunity, and then you strategic plan for it. The tactics that you use basically are the strategic plan is the big plan. This is where we're going. Tactics are, these are the individual day-to-day tasks, month-to-month, year-to-year tasks that we're going to use to help get us there. Strategies, again, are prerequisites to tactical success. So if we don't have a good strategy, we say, you know what, skip that electronic clinical record. The business is only going to need billing systems for the coming years. Not going to be a good strategy. Developing selling strategies then are plans for accomplishing sales objectives. So, once you start figuring out that this is what the market wants, then you go out to the market, you start selling. In the software business, it's not unusual to sell vaporware, as they call it. So you go out and you sell, this is the mock-up, this is what we think it's going to look like. And if you commit to it, then this is what we hope to deliver in the near future. And lots of hopes and dreams in the software business. Adaptive selling means that you're going to alter sales behaviors during interactions to improve communication. So if you talk about adaptive selling, you may have to adapt your selling strategy depending on the type of people you're working with. Obviously, IT people will react to selling very differently than a director of a clinical area in a hospital. So you have to adapt your selling technique depending on the people that you're working with. So again, back to this strategic consultative selling model, taking the 4 Ps into consideration, developing a personal selling philosophy. There's a prescription for that. You see, again, we have a prescription as we talk about it. Adopt a marketing concept, value personal selling, become a problem solver or partner. So on a personal selling basis, you're going to become a problem solver. Develop a relationship strategy where you maintain high ethical standards, project a professional image, manage the relationship process. So relationship strategy is interesting. I had one time I was in a situation where I had a client say to me, look, I can get this approved for you. What are you going to do for me? So going back to the ethical standards part of this, without outright saying it, they're asking me to give them some sort of money or benefit to actually getting the deal done. And I flatly turned them down. I mean, it's just, if you're crossing an ethical boundary, and by the way, that varies by country and by culture. So go to different countries, different cultures, you'll find that there's no way you can sell things in other countries and cultures without paying some sort of gratuity, so to speak, to certain folks to get to the next level to get your purchase order approved. And that's going to vary, again, based on the environment that you're in and, the ethical standards in that particular area. Developing a product strategy. So it's one of the things that's very interesting, particularly in the software business. This is, I actually did this, became a product expert in the software business. I was actually in the support area, was a product expert, and then used that experience and expertise to go out and sell. I knew the product better than pretty much anybody when I went into sales. So I was able to take that product expertise and knowledge as an expert and use that in my selling experience. You sell benefits. One of the things I often talk about when I go shopping. If you go shopping for electronics, for example, go shop for a TV these days. And one of my favorite things to do back in the day was to go and shop for a TV, and the salesperson, depending on their skill level, you ask them questions about the television, they'll start reading off the card in front of you on the display. And I can read the card on the display, so I don't really need anybody. Just I said, tell me about this TV, and the sales rep simply jumps into a discussion of what the features, what the features of that particular, the technical specifications and the features of that particular item. And so I used to teach this concept, and actually I've not seen it in a lot of places, but they actually call it FAB selling. It's Foxtrot Alpha Bravo, so FAB. Selling, which stands for features, advantages, and benefits. And you won't see this in a lot of publications, but it is we use this in retail. And features are the technical specifications. The advantages are why is 4K better than TV that's 1080p or a 720p or whatever. So the advantage is why is this an advantage over that? The benefit is, well, why does that matter to me? So when a sales rep merely says to me, these are the functions of this, these are the features, and doesn't ask me any questions, then that sales rep has never learned benefit selling. And so to digress a bit on this, benefit selling is essentially figuring out what matters to the person. So if I'm colorblind, which there's a large percentage of males that are colorblind. If I'm colorblind, and I'm not colorblind, but if I'm colorblind, I mean, it's a good question to ask. You certainly don't want to ask if you're colorblind, but if it's not a benefit to me to have extremely high contrast colors on a television set when I'm colorblind, then that sales rep may have missed the mark. So what's the benefit? What size room are you going to put this in? What types of things are you going to do on it? Are you going to be a gamer? Are you going to watch movies? Are you going to watch regular television? So by really asking a few questions, how much light's in the room? That really is, all of those things are going to matter in terms of what are the benefits to the individual rather than just talk about the features. So that's a little bit about FAB selling. And configure value-added solutions. So if you're selling software, again, what's the benefit to the client? What's the value add? Developing a customer strategy as a consultative selling model. So understanding the buying process and how they buy, understanding the buyer behavior, and then develop a prospect base. So if you're going to go out and sell to folks, you need to figure out how do they buy. So do they use purchase orders? Do they have a 18-month purchase cycle? Do they use RFPs, which we'll talk about later, requests for proposals? What's their buying process? Or is it like Amazon? The buying process is the buyer simply goes online on their phone, they choose the item, they check out on their own, and it's delivered to them. Not much of a role of selling in that. for an individual that's looking for a sales job. So obviously you need to gravitate towards the areas that need sales assistance. And then developing obviously a prospect base and figuring out who are the potential clients for this product or service. Developing a presentation strategy. When you go to do the presentation, you need to prepare your objectives, develop that presentation plan, and then deliver it, and then provide outstanding service on the back end. So, major strategies forming that strategic consultative selling model. The salesperson develops a relationship strategy, a product strategy, a customer strategy, and a presentation strategy. And notice throughout here in the circle is ethics. So you can do this in an unethical manner. You can do it in an ethical manner. You need to make your decision up front how you're going to run that. So relationship strategy is your thought out plan for establishing, building, and maintaining quality relationships as an integral dimension of relationship selling. So how are you going to develop relationships with your prospective clients? There's a couple of great ways you can do this. And there's, this is one of these things that depending on who you're working with and the industry you're working in, there's all kinds of strategies. So perfect example of relationship strategy, you want to build a relationship with clients is to become obviously an expert in your field and know the field real well. And one of the things I've done in the past is become a speaker at events related to the industry in which I'm working. So if I'm working in the software business selling clinical documentation systems, it's not a bad idea to be a speaker on the topic of electronic clinical records. And so a well thought out plan for establishing relationships is if people see you as an expert in the field, when it comes time for them to ask questions about or seek out solutions for this type of a product, they're going to go to the experts. They're going to go to the people that are well versed in the business. So one of my favorite relationship strategies is trade shows and public speaking at industry-related events, because this is what's going to build your credibility and make you a prime resource, we like to call it, a prime resource, the go-to person when it comes to asking questions about that. So that's, we can talk more about that, but that's a very powerful tool. Prescriptions for this relationship strategy, obviously maintaining high ethical standards, having a professional image, and managing a relationship process. But again, you should be doing those things anyway. But I really favor the idea of becoming a speaker or a resource, writing articles, blogging, all types of areas that would be very helpful for people to recognize you as the expert and the go-to person when it comes time to answer questions on products and services. Developing a product strategy is a plan that helps salespeople make correct decisions concerning the selection and positioning of products to meet identified customer needs. Again, being a product expert is a big benefit. Selling benefits, and I think a lot of folks need to understand that feature, advantage, benefits. What's the feature? Why does it matter? And what's it do for me? That is the benefit. So the feature, advantage, and the benefit. So product strategy is, customer has these needs, what's going to fit those needs? Sometimes you want to build some real credibility, maybe not make your manager so happy, but long-term success in industries will often rely on this, is that you refer somebody to a competitor or to someone else who can help them better because your product or service is not a good fit for this particular client. That will sound counterintuitive. You're here to sell something, but at the same time, in today's very interconnected social media world, selling somebody something that's not a good fit is going to be more harmful than not selling them anything at all. Sometimes no is the best answer. But also referring your prospective clients to something that's a best fit for them. And obviously we're not talking about something that's just slightly better than yours. Maybe you can make some accommodations, but we're talking about something that's just a much better fit for a client than what you're offering. Sometimes the best thing to do is refer it out. And then a customer strategy. A customer strategy is a plan that results in maximum responsiveness to the customer needs. So again, understanding the buying process, understanding the buyer behavior, and developing a prospect base. So, when you go out as a salesperson, I used to joke with my salespeople in the hospital software business when they said, I'm running out of prospects. I said, well, geez, any town that you drive into has a blue H sign has a hospital in it, and you can find that client by following the blue H signs to the hospital. So we used to joke about that. But understanding how they buy, you can't just show up at a hospital unaccounted for. Today, more than ever, you can't just walk into a hospital and say, I'd like to sell you this equipment that I'm selling or sell you this software. You can't just show up. When I stopped working in the hospital software business 10 years ago, at that time you had to, they had systems where you had to pre-register as vendors. You couldn't be on the campus unless you had an appointment and were pre-registered. That's 10 years ago. So there's all kinds of things that you have to know going into this customer strategy to make sure that you understand how they buy. They're certainly not going to buy your goods or services because you just showed up and had a good story today. A presentation strategy is a well-developed plan for meeting objectives for each sales call. So, this is a matter of being intimately familiar with the client. I used the example early on about advertising salespeople, calling up and asking me to buy advertising. We in the business call that dialing for dollars, right? So or we smile and dial, right? So you're dialing the phone, trying to get as many people on the phone and talk to them about your product or service. The challenge with that is if you want to be really successful, so you could look at that and say, look, you could make 50 calls today and have the success of 50 calls being unprepared. You could make 5 or 8 calls today where you're intimately prepared when you get that person on the phone. Personally, I'd like to make fewer, more successful sales calls, whether it's on the phone or in person, than I would just making a lot of calls. Success is really matters. It's what comes out the other end. It doesn't matter how many you did, it matters how many you were successful with. So you need to prepare, and I talked about how preparing today is so much easier than it used to be because there's so much information available online. And prepare your plan, your presentation plan, and then you renew your commitment to customer service and explain to them how you're going to service after the sale. So then we move on to partnering. We talk about partnering with our clients and we look at their strategic plan and where they want to be, and we look at our own strategic plan and where we are. And we essentially adapt our products and services in many cases, depending on the company, based on where the client's going. And if we can get into a client and figure out what we can do to help service them over a longer period of time, and the length of the partnership we have with them, the more successful we are as a company. Typically, the more money we make over time. We'll learn later in the class, and we'll talk more about retention and actually acquisition, where you're going out and acquiring new clients. But I'm sure you've heard by now in other classes that it's so much more worthwhile to hold on to clients than it is to just go out and acquire new ones. So the benefit here is the sales that increase over time because you've paid attention and you've partnered with your client and you understand what their goals and objectives are, and you marry those to the ones at your company. So we've got a couple of terms here for some different associated jobs. We talked about this in the first chapter. Strategic account manager, regional account managers, key account managers, national and global account managers. And again, these are some different terms for some different folks. Some of them are quite obvious. Somebody that's a regional account manager versus a national account manager. But let's just go down through some of these real quick. So strategic account manager typically executes enterprise-wide sales strategy for growth, profitability, customer loyalty, and customer-driven innovation. They usually are involved in senior level management on the sales and buying teams and relationship development, product configuration, and service after the sale. Technical sales support people are also usually on an account management team, so they're there to help make sure that they understand the technical aspects of what the client needs. But the strategic account manager often will head up a team of people that will actually be interdisciplinary and actually work with the client to make sure that everything's being taken care of. Other strategic account manager roles and titles: the regional account manager, maybe for region, number of business accounts; key account manager for prioritized accounts; national account managers looking for national, new regional and national clients; global account manager, obviously not looking at a specific geography. So again, partnering is a big deal when it comes to ethical standards, as are all. And of course, all of this ties together with customer relationship management. So that's going to be another important piece of this, is to use the CRM system as a tool for you. Building strategic account relationships, again, pretty straightforward based on some of the things we talked about. Learn about your proposed partner. Where do you get that information? Google's your friend. Meet with them and explore the benefits of an alliance. Again, lots of conversations, lots of questionnaires, learn more about what their business is. What do they like, not like about current vendors, solutions, what's worked, what's not worked. And you present on profit impact and strategic alliance benefits. So you basically talk about why working together is going to be beneficial to both companies. All right, so moving on, again, a little graph on, again, understanding the customer's value needs, creating a value proposition, communicating the value proposition, and delivering the value proposition. So we talk about value creation in an information economy. Traditional selling's been too emphasized over time with communicating value that lies in a product rather than what the value is. Again, this is getting back to that feature, advantage, benefit. So just talking about the features or the advantages and not why does this matter to my client. So creating and delivering a customer value model, understanding their needs, and creating that value proposition and communicating what we're going to be able to do for you. So in review, for Chapter 2, we discussed the evolution of personal selling models as an extension of the marketing concept, described the evolution of consultative selling from the marketing era to the present, defined strategic selling in the name of the 4 broad strategic areas in the strategic consultative selling model, and we've described, and essentially that wraps it up. So that's Chapter 2 for MBA 543, and I'm Adam Conrad.